Good morning, or good afternoon, or somewhere in between. My name's Andrew Whitkin, and I have the pleasure to introduce our two speakers today, but I wanted to begin by just recounting my childhood. Not the full extent, but in 1983, and I'm from Boston, in 1983, my parents took me to a museum which is outside of Boston called the DeCordova. At the DeCordova was this weird show. These little machines, printing things, this goofy guy walking around talking about what was happening and kept on talking about Aaron. That's basically my memory from 1983. In 1995, there was a museum in Boston called the Computer Museum. Remember, this is the city of MIT, et cetera, et cetera. And I see an exhibition, 1995, right? I think. Yeah. I see an exhibition, and it's the same guy. And it's these same tools, but they're kind of working better. And it was quite interesting because I was with my brother, who had no interest in arts, and I was very interested in art, and he was a computer geek. And it was, I think, in our lives, it's the only show we ever saw together, and both wanted to stick around and look at it. So the other day, Jenny Gibbs, director of the IFPDA, asked if I would introduce about the show and our wonderful guests, and I jumped at it because this is a topic, an artist, a figure, a period that is so interesting to think about today. And I'm not going to get into too much why, but really I just want to thank Kim, Conaty, and Christiane Paul for being here and for also making this exhibition, which I think in this day is so important to look back and always remember that somebody did whatever is being done before. And there is something to learn from that as we move forward. So on your left is Kim Conaty. She's the Stephen and Ann Ames Curator of Drawings and Prints and Interim Director of the Collection at the Whitney Museum of Art. Friend, colleague, amazing person to watch and see as she does such great things at the Whitney. And on your right is Christiane Paul, who is the Curator of Digital Art at the Whitney Museum and the curator of this exhibition, Harold Cohen, Aaron, that is up now. And if you have not seen it, you need to see it. In addition, she's the author of numerous books. Most probably significant to me is simply the one titled Digital Art. If you're here today and you're interested in what we're talking about, you probably should read this. So without further ado, thank you both for being here and taking your time to be among us. I'm thrilled to hear what you have to say and present.
Thanks so much, Andrew.
Thank you, Andrew. Thanks to Andrew for that nice, warm introduction, and we wanted to also thank Jenny and Michelle for allowing this program to happen and for supporting it, including a PowerPoint that includes a lot of video, which is not typical for the print fair, but we've got it. It's going to work well, and we're really excited to be here on the occasion of the print fair, which also happens to be a time where we have this tremendous exhibition at the Whitney, Harold Cohen, Aaron, that Christiane organized and that we'll be kind of speaking about today. And we realized that because of a number of the kind of big questions around art making and technology that Harold Cohen's practice brings out for us, this was an interesting opportunity to also bring this conversation into a print context, thus here today. So I wanted to start, so Christiane will talk about different, the background, Harold Cohen's background and a bit about the exhibition, but I think what we wanted to do also at the outset was to kind of bring up a few, like a kind of a big picture question that we're going to be thinking about throughout the conversation, and that is, what are these potential connections between AI and print? There maybe are not such obvious connections, but how do these seemingly unrelated materials and media have these interesting interconnections? So I don't know if you wanted to start with a couple of ideas that maybe can help carry us through with the rest of the conversation.
Yeah, thanks so much, Kim, and thanks to everyone for being here. Very good question. I think most people, when they hear AI, they think of something that is happening on a screen and rendered to a screen, and prints and drawings are probably the last thing they're thinking about. But one important point we want to make here with that conversation is also that AI per se is relatively medium agnostic when it comes to the output. We'll get into all of this in a lot more depth, the fact that early digital artists used plotters and printers because they couldn't even render to the screen. But what you can generate with artificial intelligence can take multiple forms, from a print to a drawing to a painting. And I also want to use the term medium agnostic a little bit carefully, because for an artist, as you know, there still always is the question, what does the work want to be? Does it want to be a print, or does it want to be a drawing or a lithograph or a painting? So I don't want to diminish that, but it's important to understand that AI can take pretty much any type of output, and that is the connection here in the context.
Definitely. And we're starting here, obviously, with a slide that shows a glimpse into Crown Point Press on the left, which some of you may recognize, and the idea of like what it means to kind of like pull a print, and this kind of the sense of collaboration, the sense of the use of technology in this way, and then also a glimpse at one of Harold Cohen's projects where you see that there's the laptop there really running, creating a, that holds the kind of the logarithm, the code for realizing a drawing, which is then being plotted by the plotter there. So these kind of interesting ways they come together. Could you tell us about who Harold Cohen was and a little bit about his background?
Yeah, Harold Cohen, and I realize many people were not aware of him, while for the people in the digital art world, he really is an icon. Harold Cohen was a very established British painter. He represented the UK in the 1966 Venice Biennale. You see one of his paintings that actually was in the Biennale on the right. On the left, you have a lithograph that is in the collection of Tate. He had exhibitions at Tate. They did a show, Cohen and Matisse. So very established British painter. The 60s are also the time, as you probably know, of conceptual art, of systems art, of cybernetics. And Harold Cohen, as many others, was very interested in systems. He also titled one of his paintings Systems. You see here this kind of microbial visual aesthetic. So he also became a little frustrated with the media he had been using in terms of the fact that painting or prints are not necessarily the best medium of addressing systems. So in 1968, he is being invited to UCSD and comes to the US and is introduced to computing, and then for the rest of his life embarks on this journey to create software for art making and AI software for art making. And I will take you pretty rapidly through the different stages to set up our conversation here. So the first thing he develops around 1970 is the so-called freehand line algorithm. Harold Cohen deeply believed that in order for something to be art, it needed intentionality, and the intentionality of the line was incredibly important to him. So what you see here on the screen is early beginnings of doing these freehand lines. And he has an exhibition in 1972 at LACMA where he exhibits 3 behaviors for the partitioning of space. And one of them are the mazes, which you see here on screen. And in the slide we showed you before, you actually see the mazes being plotted on a plotter in the Whitney galleries. So we resurrected that code for the exhibition. So at this point, the work isn't called Aaron yet. Cohen visits the petroglyphs in Chalfont Valley, which very much inspire him. His work is really also about the question, when does a mark gain meaning and become a form? He's also very much inspired by the way children draw. And then in 1973, he gets invited to the Stanford Artificial Intelligence Lab by Edward Feigenbaum. And this is where he names his software Aaron. And the naming both alludes to the biblical character Aaron, the brother of Moses, who was anointed as Moses' spokesperson because he supposedly was more eloquent. Aaron is also Cohen's Hebrew name. So at the Worth Rider Art Gallery, Aaron basically makes its debut. And you can see here that this is another phase, kind of abstract forms, which is the first period of it. These then become more elaborate, as you see here in this exhibition at SF MoMA in 1979. So you see here one of the first drawing devices, the turtle that Cohen uses to execute these drawings in black and white. He will then color them himself. Then he has the show that Andrew mentions at the Cordova and Brooklyn Museum and other shows, and you can still see here those abstract shapes that gain more perspective. And then a major shift comes in the late 80s, where he starts doing figurative work, and in the early 90s, he actually has Aaron do color compositions too. So here you see the painting machine that was exhibited in Boston at the Computer Art Museum, where Aaron fully executes everything, not only the outline and composition, but also the paint. Yep.
The point that you made, and we've talked about this before, about the naming of Aaron and this idea, I think the particularly like interesting way of thinking about that as being Moses' brother and the sort of the spokesperson. Mm-hmm. And you've also talked about how Harold Cohen often saw Aaron, this sort of software, this idea, as a collaborator, mm-hmm. as almost another, like a part of his own self that he can then work with. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Cohen actually saw his work with Aaron always as a collaboration. He called Aaron his other self. Mm-hmm. And I want to also point out the differences to today's AI in Cohen's practice at this point. You may be reading about AI and AI, quote unquote, art making every day in terms of current software such as DALL-E and Stable Diffusion and Midjourney, and these are statistical AI models. So these AIs are trained on data sets of millions of images that are all associated with text. You type in text prompts and generate an image basically by this optimization, standardization of mashing things together in this blurry, uncanny aesthetic. This is radically different from what Harold Cohen was doing. AI was formalized as a field in the 1950s. The term was coined by John McCarthy in 1956. And AI in the 60s, early 70s is so-called symbolic AI that is based on heuristics and rules. So Harold Cohen really created each and every tiny little aspect of the rule sets that make these drawings possible. First of all, the shapes, and then the figurative drawings. So Aaron has knowledge of external objects and figures in the world and internal knowledge of representation of them. So it's a radically different AI system.
Yeah, and that is something I was thinking about with with, for example, the mazes, where if you imagine, and also Cohen's idea of what does it take for a mark to take on meaning, mm-hmm. right? So to create a maze, like what are the rules that make a maze a maze? That the lines can't, that you need to be able to have lines that create paths that can be followed, that don't get kind of chopped up along the way. So the idea of creating, allowing the rules to basically teach Aaron that this is what a maze is, or for the figures, that a figure includes, like that eyes can be these colors, that a body structure includes these elements, that it is like there's imminent variation within that, but that it's based on this particular rule set, which, as you say, is very different from today's kind of statistical AI. We're pulling from huge data sets, and so maybe could we look quickly at, so since we're kind of talking about Cohen's background, and knowing that we are here in New York, and some of you may have gone to the exhibition at the Whitney or may be going, could you just show us kind of what the experience is in the galleries now, kind of getting to see Aaron?
Yeah, I'm going to give you just a very brief overview. All of the works in the exhibition are actually drawn from our collection, which also means that this isn't a full retrospective. We're not representing all of the phases of Aaron. So this is a view of the entry, and to the left you have a later phase of Aaron, to the right the more figurative phase. So in 2021 we brought 2 of the Aaron softwares into the collection. KCAD on the left, which is named after Kurzweil Cyber Art Technologies. Ray Kurzweil, whom you may have heard about as an AI guru, actually commissioned that work. And on the right, you have a software from 2007 where figures disappear and you have plants. And we're also pairing those with paintings from an earlier phase where you have figures. And here is just an impression of what this software looks like in action. So all the softwares in the gallery are running in real time, continuously creating new compositions. So Aaron, in this version, really understands how branches are grown, what structures leaves can have, and creates these jungle environments in real time on the fly. Obviously, what I'm showing you here is not the software in real time, but a screen recording, but in the galleries, you see it live.
And that is kind of, I think, one of the exciting things of being in the galleries. I mean, those of us who work there who can go up any time is very nice too, that you're literally, it's always different. You're always seeing something new, and that you've managed to make this work because we're running off of the software itself.
And we paired these with a couple of paintings from an earlier phase. So as you see here, the figures are still fairly abstract. So Cohen was inspired by Matisse also in terms of his economy of means of using marks to create figures, and this series also alludes to Cézanne's bathers. You see a blurring of the background with the skin of the figures in a different color scheme than Cézanne, but those were influences. And of course, you see the jungle-like environment already. So here we're looking more at the figurative phase in the galleries, and I'm giving you a glimpse of what the KCAD software looks like. So this one in real time creates ever new combinations of people, up to 3 people in different poses, with flower pots and plants and sometimes paintings in the background. All of those images have kind of perspective and create a compositional space, and Aaron also has knowledge of color composition and creates those. So none of these images will ever repeat, none of them is ever recorded, so they're just there for the moment, every 30 seconds switching. Yeah.
Can we go back to that last image? Because I was thinking that, one of the things that you also have said about Cohen's reflection on his own practice was that as someone who started as a painter, that he recognized, like kind of later in his career, that in fact, by creating these rules, by creating something like Aaron, by creating these rules-based algorithms that kind of dissected painting, that were like, what makes a still life, what makes a maze, that he felt he actually learned more about painting than if he had just simply been, like, continued to work as a painter.
Absolutely. I think that is the core of Harold Cohen's practice. He always made art about the meaning of art, and that was really his exploration, and that's what he wanted to investigate with his work. So it was always meta art and art about art. And AI gave him a unique opportunity to do that and really break down composition and thinking through composition and thinking about how we represent. As you can see here, there's also a very specific style to what he does and what he creates. There could be a zillion ways of representing figures, you know, and this is also very much his aesthetic. So it's radically different from corporate tools that basically, where you're dependent on a specific kind of data set. This is really his aesthetic. So the Aaron software would understand that a face has a nose and eyes and a mouth, and that there can be facial hair and hair in different styles. And then for each of these compositions, it pulls all of these elements together. People sometimes have asked me, oh, how does it know how to create a sad face or a happy face? It actually doesn't. It knows that a mouth can have different shapes, and sometimes that makes someone look happy or sad, you know. So once again, working in a different way, you know.
Yeah. And I think for me, and coming not from the digital art side, learning, as we all are, but coming from the world of print, that I was really kind of, that idea of Cohen recognizing how much he learned about painting by kind of taking it apart and thinking about its rules, and that had a really interesting resonance with, I think, many artists and how they have experienced printmaking, especially in, you know, their first opportunities to make prints, where so many artists have talked about like the different ways that you can think about layers or create a composition, or how you're stacking, or how you're working in reversals depending on the medium. And that for, you know, you have artists like Jasper Johns and Rauschenberg, obviously famously talking about how making prints was really something that allowed them to make their practice better, allowed them to learn more about their practice overall. And I think that's like this way that we think about how artists have used or have worked with technology in these ways for now centuries, not just very recently, is a kind of a good way of thinking about that. I was also thinking about this question of the algorithm and the matrix, which we have talked about a little bit, because of course, in thinking about this conversation today, I was trying to think about like where precisely are those intersections between ideas around printmaking, beyond, of course, collaboration, I think, is a big one here. You think of, you know, an artist collaborating with a printmaker, and then we have Harold Cohen kind of collaborating with Aaron with this, with the AI, but also thinking about what it means to have a matrix, to have something that kind of holds the information in a way, in the same way that the algorithm kind of holds the information that then can be executed. But of course, as we were discussing this, there still is a little bit of slippage there, because a matrix is a kind of a discrete object that has marks embedded in it in some form or another, depending on the matrix. And you can use, you know, many matrices to kind of obviously build up a composition. There's many things you can do with that, but with the algorithm, there's this agency within the algorithm itself. So the information is there, the rules have been put there, but then that's where you have this like almost other brain in there that can create the variations.
Yeah, I think that's a very nice way of describing it. So there is the unifying foundation, basically, where most of digital art is also built on Cartesian space and Cartesian plane and that type of matrix. But as you said, in this particular case, you know, AI and generative art, it's the agency that is embedded within that matrix. And what is tied to that is also this difference between plotters and printers.
Yes.
So everything that Harold Cohen does here is based on vector graphics. So the dots, lines, curves, within that Cartesian space that make their way across the matrix. You know, of course, there's always the defined space of it. And what is really unique to that is also the scalability of it. You can scale vector graphics, like we're doing huge projections in the galleries, and the work doesn't lose in that process. You can shrink and scale it. And what is unique to plotters is that they are drawing with pens on the basis of these vector graphics. That's why they're considered inferior, actually, to printers, as opposed to printers, which take their commands from networks and are inherently networks. Plotters are not. And you have all heard of dot matrix printers. So here you have more of the emphasis on the pixel in that space. And yeah, I also want to point out here, we can get more deeply into that Harold Cohen, once again, depending on what he was doing, would be choosing between a print. He also would print in black and white the figurative compositions of Aaron. He would plot, so he really used the whole spectrum and make decisions.
And when you say print, you mean he would literally like make a lithograph, or he would make a print from,
Make a print, use a printer, make a print from, one thing to mention here, which I didn't get into earlier, you have seen the paintings. The way Harold did get things onto canvas or onto paper would differ radically. Sometimes it is a lithograph. Sometimes he would actually enlarge. So Aaron would have done a composition, but then he would project from a slide and recreate on canvas, or a turtle or drawing device would create this on the floor. So very different ways of bringing something to paper. Yeah.
And then maybe, do we want to talk about like plotter drawing do we want to go to the algorithm, or do we want to talk about, should we stay here for now?
Let's stay here for now
and great.
Bring them in later. Yeah.
Great, okay. And so here you're also seeing, these are the two plotters that are currently on display and making drawings in the Whitney exhibition now, and you see the laptop here. I think there's something here too about that I'm thinking about in relation to like tools and how, I mean, because you had said that Cohen, once he realized sort of what he wanted to be able to realize in these works with Aaron, that he built his own plotters. You know, in the same way also that I think of a lot of like print shops, like, you know, you're constantly responding to what an artist wants to make and thinking about how to build up something, or how to, you know, glitch something, a system that you have in order to create the, you know, realize that final result.
Yeah. So once again, what you're looking at are the plotters in the gallery. So you see in the foreground the one plotting the mazes, and you see also the software on the computer. And then in the back is the figurative one, which actually plots the KCAD software in black and white. And as Kim pointed out, Harold Cohen built his own plotters, drawing machines. He also became a terrific engineer. You often see him in photos with a soldering iron next to him. He literally would create parts that he also could have bought at the hardware store. He was that obsessed with engineering. There are still a few of the original old plotters, drawing machines in existence as carcasses, and we early on looked into the possibility of maybe reviving them. But what we quickly learned was that in the process, we would destroy them in order to adapt them to, modern drivers and systems. I'm not saying that it couldn't be done, but what it would require is literally rebuilding the parts that Harold Cohen built himself. So that's more like a decade-long endeavor, and we didn't have that time. So one of the members of our digital art acquisition committee meeting, Bree Pettis, who also is the founder of MakerBots and does desktop CNC milling and is a Harold Cohen collector, said, I'll build you plotters. So we tried to also be very true to the originals here. So the plotters operate at the same speed at which Harold would have drawn at the time. I looked at letters to Robert Mallory in which he proudly says, oh, in 1972, I'm now drawing at 2 inches per second. So we're sticking to the speed of the time. I don't know if you noticed that in the images we showed you, but we're using Sharpies here. Harold Cohen did not use Sharpies, but we did a deep dive into felt pen research and the line width and everything. And in the end, we realized that Sharpies came closest to what he would actually use.
And can we talk about what is happening? Oh, yeah, so here we see it actually realizing one of these drawings. What is happening with these drawings that are being made? Because this is something that, again, if I'm trying to, thinking about relationships with printmaking, in a print shop, you are likely to addition, a print, right? That you would have a limit on how many you're running. This is so totally different from that, especially in the sense that it's, infinitely changeable, and it's going to continue to produce new results each time. But what this means in a very physical way for us at the museum is that we are producing a lot of drawings, and had to figure out in advance of this exhibition what the status of these drawings are, where you have a now deceased artist, you have his algorithm, Aaron, that is still alive and well. We have these machines making these works, so I think that would be an interesting conversation to hear more about from you.
Yeah, so we will generate, I think, 3,000 to 5,000 of the drawings over the course of the exhibition. It doesn't take long to create one of the mazes that you have just seen here. And we have the permission from the Harold Cohen Trust to select as many of the drawings as we want for the Whitney Museum's exhibition archive. And the rest will go back. Which is
not the same thing as the permanent collection.
Yeah, not the same as the permanent collection. Because in order to enter the permanent collection, these would need to be Harold Cohen works. And here comes the crux of all of this. Harold Cohen infamously used to joke that I will be the only artist who ever posthumously has an exhibition of new work. So to some extent, that is, of course, true. As Kim said, there is new output of the Aaron software generated in the galleries every day. But the Trust would not consider them new Harold Cohens, and I fully agree with them, because coming back to our point about collaboration, what it takes to do a Harold Cohen would be the artist himself, the software, and the process of constantly going back and forth and tweaking and working on the system. At some point, Cohen felt that Aaron had a little too much autonomy and agency and would dial it back. So it was a continuous dialogue between him and the software. And that dialogue ended with his death in 2016. So it's very important to the Trust that these are not considered new Harold Cohens, that we're not flooding the market with them. Each and every one of them is unique. So Harold would sign them with his name. We're putting a stamp on it that has the Whitney branding also, since it's a Whitney exhibition, and we're noting the number of the Aaron drawings. They are numbered, and also the seed of the code for the mazes, because every day we generate a new batch of it, and we use a different seed. We slightly tweak, as Harold would have, the numbers, so that there is always a new combination. And we are also making a note of the seed number of these.
Yeah, it's funny. It's very, it's like the idea of a posthumous print, where if you have a plate that hasn't been canceled and could potentially be printed again, we have posthumous prints that exist and that can be in the marketplace, but that need to be kind of labeled as such, and it has a different significance because obviously it wasn't something that was made and signed by the artist. So you're actually following this, very typical, like, I guess, the way that the print world would think about something like that. It makes perfect sense.
Yeah. Absolutely, yeah. And coming back also to prints and lithographs once again, staying with the earlier phase. So here you see an evolution from the mazes you have just seen before. This is one of the lithographs from the Amsterdam suite, still hand-colored by Harold, once again, collaboration with the system and more evolved in terms of these evocative shapes, but once again emphasizing the differences in output here.
I also love this, this idea of the hand-colored, which you'll see in the exhibition. It's easy to imagine when you walk into the exhibition, as you saw some installation images before. There is, in fact, only one work in the exhibition that non-digital, a work that is like on the wall framed, that was made with the kind of painting machine. So where Cohen himself was not the one coloring, but that the algorithm was programming the machine to actually paint that color. And yet, stylistically, they're so similar because, as you mentioned before, he's teaching the AI to, in a way, follow some of his own stylistic interests. But and then the idea of like what it meant, even historically, to hand color a print before color printing was a possibility. This is something that's like kind of embedded in that practice as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this lithograph also so nicely shows his idea of color composition. If you compare it to the 2001 KCAD software, you see some of the same colors and color combinations. So it really has Harold Cohen's aesthetics that you already see in the early work from the 70s.
Definitely. Definitely.
Yeah, and then we move on to figurative, of course, and these are earlier examples from what you see plotted in the gallery. Yeah.
Yeah, and now you're sort of seeing more closely how we are displaying the work. It's really also changing on a daily basis, thanks to Christiane and our team. It's kind of it's a wild exhibition that's literally changing every single day. So that our visitors can see the different types of drawings that Aaron is making along the way.
And that is also following Harold Cohen's practice. He would usually be there, and he would hang pieces up on the wall. So we basically created this grid for magnets, and then on a daily basis, I make decisions with the curatorial assistant, David Lisbon, who has been working with me, and we pick our favorites. David loves the empty flower pots that are part of the composition, and we hang them up, and over the course of the exhibition, we will also switch them out then. So.
Definitely.
And yeah, here you get another impression of how this all plays out in the gallery, intercut the mazes and
exactly
the plots of the work.
We were noticing, you'll see this when you come to the exhibition if you haven't already. I don't think we see this quite play out here, but this certain, it's interesting to, as you look at the works that Aaron is making, both in the digital, in the projections you'll see, and then also in the works, kind of the framed works in the wall, the paintings, to think to yourself, like, what would have been some of the rules in imagining, like, what does a still life, what makes up a still life, or what makes up the figure. One of our colleagues asked this great question, like, why are all the figures wearing V-necks?
Yeah.
They're all wearing V-necks, all of them. And it does feel like you had a great answer to that.
Yeah, because it gives you, or the software in Harold, as a V-neck is
there it goes, as if on cue.
Done right now. More options representationally for the neck, which always consists of these 4 lines, 2 inner ones, 2 outer ones, and then you also see clavicles. So the expression of the figure is so much more pronounced, as if compared to everyone wearing a turtleneck, or
right, exactly.
giving you the, so here is a nice image which really shows you how necks are being drawn.
That, like, that is part of the rule, that this is part of a body.
Yeah.
These marks that make up the neck, which is kind of great. Do we have more here, or now are we on to the? We are going to do questions, but maybe we'll wait for another few minutes.
Algorithms. And one thing I also, before we move into the practice of the 60s a little bit, I also wanted to mention that there was a major excavation effort and conservation effort involved in this show, while the later softwares, KCAD and the jungle software, Aaron Rijon, are still the original softwares. We had to resurrect the early code. We actually found the code for the freehand line algorithm in one of Harold's notebooks. Originally, that code was written in BASIC, and his son, Paul Cohen, actually transcribed it line by line and recreated it in Python to make it more adaptable for modern plotters. So there was a real conservation effort. So it's Harold's code, and his rule system, but we really had to make it work again and bring it back to life again.
That is a really good segue to something that I was thinking is, like, really important here, and thinking about how how institutions think about this kind of work, and also how we preserve it, how we keep it in a collection. Because you mentioned before that all of the works in this exhibition are in the Whitney's collection, and that includes now, especially, the algorithms. It includes the code. So this is something that, you know, let's say if I'm making another relationship to printmaking, many institutions don't typically acquire or hold in their collection a matrix, for example. You know, many institutions have some by way of, like, a larger gift, but there's nothing, we're not doing anything with those. It's almost just becomes an object, not something that can realize further work. In the case of Aaron, in the case of this material, it doesn't really exist if it can't continue to make. So the idea of being able, as an institution, I think we're the first institution to actually collect this digital work in this way, in the code. It's incredibly important, because it does, in fact, allow us to not just show, let's say, a video of the software working, but actually to have the live software working in the gallery and to display it in that way.
Yeah.
Correct me if I said that wrong.
No.
I'm always, like, holding on by a thread.
No, absolutely. So Aaron's output, the paintings, the drawings, Cohen's work, has been collected widely all over the world, you know, from Tate to V&A, and you name the institution. There are Aaron works in those holdings, but no institution but the Whitney has started collecting the software versions over time, because to me, it's the software that is Aaron. You know, all of those paintings and drawings are Aaron output, and I don't want to diminish them as artworks, but at the core of it, is that software that creates. And that is also, I think, an important point for situating this in the practice of the 60s and what has been going on with prints there.
Definitely.
And the work of the algorists.
Yeah, so will you tell us a little about this is probably, I mean, I now know a little bit about this mostly from working with Christiane and from some great kind of joint acquisitions that we've worked on between Christiane's digital art committee at the Whitney and my drawing and print committee, where we've been able to kind of come together around plotter drawing. But could you talk about the algorist for a minute and kind of that? Yeah. Also the distinction between what Cohen was doing in there.
Yeah, so as you may know, the 1960s were the period when the first computer art emerged and the first exhibitions took place. And here you are looking at the group of people who were really formative in doing this. Mark Wilson, Manfred Mohr, Roman Verosco, Frieda Nake in Germany, Herbert Franke and Jean-Pierre Hébert. Some of them lived in the US actually. Hébert was based here. Nake is German, as is Franke, and Vera Molnar, who did beautiful, beautiful work we cannot collect at the Whitney because she's Hungarian. She died shortly before her 100th birthday this year, and has done really amazing work. And it was Roman Verosco who later on coined the term the algorists for these artists who are in the 60s working with algorithms that are then plotted and with pen plotter drawings. So Harold Cohen often gets looped in with that group. You frequently find his name mentioned with the algorists, but Aaron and the Aaron software is radically different as artificial intelligence from what these artists were doing, creating compositions on the basis of tweaking algorithms, also using punch cards in order to then draw with pen plotters. Cohen admittedly didn't quite like their work because his approach was different. Manfred Mohr was telling me on Monday, first we had a pretty tense relationship because he was pretty clear that he didn't like what I was doing, but we later on in life became friends and had a friendly relationship. And here you have one of the works that him and I acquired through our committee's joint acquisition by Manfred Mohr. And you see it here in an exhibition. And we also have works by, once again, Jean-Pierre Hébert, by Joan Truckenbrod, who I think history has to be corrected a little bit here. You seldom, if you look up the algorists, you do not find her mentioned, but she was working in the US in the 70s with the same mechanism. She needs to be reintegrated into that group.
Definitely. Okay, so should we open to questions?
Yeah, sure.
We've now put out a lot of information. Some of it may be new, maybe a lot of it is new, but we would love any questions. I know there was one hand before. I don't know if you still have a question, sorry.
You get the second, okay.
Oh, sorry.
Microphone is on its way.
I didn't see the microphone's there, sorry, Michelle.
Yeah, you kind of answered my question. The heart of the matter is the code. That's what the starting point is, the code.
Yes, but I also want to, it's a great question. I want to differentiate this a little bit. So I would also say that at the heart of the work of the algorists is the code. I have had interesting discussions with my committee where they actually were not that interested in acquiring one of the works because it wasn't the vintage original plotter drawing of it. And to me personally, my opinion is, okay, that fetishizes the output way too much, because I would say I don't care that much about it. I get the that vintage may be higher priced, but I would say it's the code and it's totally legitimate to remake it, while others would say in the more traditional print drawing community, oh no, vintage is very important.
Or that's almost more like photography in some way.
Yes,
like a
yeah.
photograph versus a reprint where you're working from the same negative, but then the idea of what was so yeah, that's interesting, but that's a good question.
So it's an ongoing discussion. I'm very biased. I would say the code is absolutely it, yes. No, it is proprietary. So, I mean, everybody asks about, whether this is open source, and it is not. Yeah, it's not open source code. Yeah.
I guess because if someone saw it, they could copy it and then make one of these drawings.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, and none of the, all the corporate tools you're using today, they are, completely locked down, and a lot of it is happening in the black box. So I also understand that. We also are just building on that a little bit. We are also very careful about I would love to give those drawings away, as Harold Cohen would have done sometimes as part of shows, but today you run into issues with people just taking off the Whitney stamp, minting an NFT on the basis of it. Suddenly it appears on the market. It's a different world.
Like mine, yeah.
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 There are 3 more questions. Yeah. No, so AP is artist proof, yeah. And of course, if the artist were alive, it is true that I think they would still make a different version of the AP if they were tweaking it. But that is obviously with the software not an option anymore. So it's really just the trust retaining an artist proof of the software as a copy. So both the Aaron KCAD and the Aaron Gijon software are uniques with one AP. The freehand line algorithm, I did not include caption, tombstone caption here. That is actually a much higher edition with several APs, yeah.
The other question is, at the time when he was doing this, there was a phenomena whereby certain animals, like elephants and chimpanzees, would create art.
Yeah.
And it got very popular. Did he ever have a reaction to that in terms of, oh, you're part of my tribe, maybe I'm getting the code from them. The phenomena that what is art, and some of them were sold for a lot of money, and they were very beautiful in terms of abstraction.
Mm-hmm.
Comment on that?
I have no idea if Harold Cohen ever commented on animal drawings. I did not have that conversation with him either. But I think, so I cannot speak for Harold, but I'm going out on a limb here. Since everything was so much about intentionality, I think he would have differentiated the intentionality of an elephant from that of a human being. Then again, if he were still alive today, as you may know, there is a lot of movement to not be so anthropocentric in terms of AI algorithms, but to look at other intelligences and animal intelligences. So AI is very much moving into that direction. So who knows? Today he may have rethought the algorithms.
Metaphysical question. You knew him well. During his lifetime, do you think that he was a happy person, content in his work, or was he a frustrated artist?
That's always so hard. Okay, Harold could be grumpy, but I wouldn't go so far as to say he wasn't a happy person. And it was, it's interesting that I got in the gallery from a few people the feedback that, oh, I think this was a very happy artist because the work looks so positive and so so happy. So I like that idea.
Yeah, I like that. That's great. Yeah.
Just to the earlier question about where true art
Well, the two cannot be separated, right? Because the algorithm generates the output. So when I talk about output, I mean more like, oh, here is a finished painting or drawing, and that is output of Aaron. But the software itself that generated it is literally the heart of it all. And for him, once again, it was a process of a back and forth, of tweaking it, working with it. And one also needs to keep in mind that he was super selective. He made a selection of which ones do I turn into a painting, which one of those creations. And I'm sure he also threw out a lot of them that weren't for him up to par of the composition. So the software definitely was what he was collaborating with ultimately. And then also being selective about the output. So on both ends, I think his hand was in that, but he definitely would have considered his code the core of it all. Yeah. I think there was. And
we haven't forgotten you.
one more question in the front, too.
Yeah.
I've actually got several questions too, but a fairly simple one is, did he know some LeWitt? And was there a relation that people talked about the differences between songs simply using verbal instructions and these technical, I guess you call them, algorithms?
Yeah. So thanks for pointing that out. So obviously, it was the time of conceptual art, and I think the intersection between conceptual art and the idea as the machine that makes the art, as LeWitt would put it, was a major influence for the algorists. They were all aware of LeWitt, and also many of them knew him. Frida Nake had an exchange with him. He actually rewrote LeWitt's
sentences.
Yeah. And for computer art, I do not know if Harold personally knew LeWitt, but he once again would have understood his practice as very different from LeWitt. So LeWitt was closely, I think, associated conceptually with what the algorists were doing. Same idea in a different medium, but LeWitt also wasn't AI-based, and the instructions that he would create are closer to what the algorists were doing than what Cohen was doing. So not a direct influence.